All right. Hello. We are the Fredericksburg Recorders, the Greater Fredericksburg chapter of the American Recorder Society, and this is our monthly chapter meeting. And I'm Kelly. Our tech officer is Jarrett, and we're joined by a few people today. So January is always a hard time to have a meeting. But today we are going to be talking about our part 2 of ornamentation. So part 1, back in November, we did a quick overview of what's called the Essential Graces. This series has been inspired in part by our tech officer, Jarrett, who about a year ago sent me this very confusing piece of paper that the host has spotlighted my video. Okay. He sent me this very confusing piece of paper that was talking about ornamentation, and it was making ornamentation very, very difficult. Hi, Bill. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. And so we needed to break that down and start talking about ornamentation in a way that made sense. So part 1 was about the essential graces, appoggiaturas, trills, mordents, turns, things of that sort. You can find that video on our website, and you can read about that on our website. So here we are. It's today. I'm Kelly Kazak. Tech officer is Jarrett. We've got our conductor, James Kazak, here. There's our email, our website/blog, our Facebook. Join our Facebook. We have an Instagram and a YouTube. So let's get into it. We are talking about the diminutions, adding more wiggles. So I have this lovely quote by Quantz. Quantz, of course, is our 18th century flutist who wrote one of the very first, most complete flute treatises. It says, almost every person who applies himself to the art of music, especially outside of France, is not contented to play solely the essential grace notes. In the main, they wish also to follow their own taste and seek to perform a melody with different arbitrary variations or extempore embellishments. I'm going to put on some more high-powered glasses here. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, those extemporaneous embellishments, which aren't quite so extemporaneous. Now here's another word of caution. Like the essential graces, this is an enormous topic, and today we're going to be restricting ourselves to the late 17th through the mid-18th century. We're looking mostly at Italian music and Italian examples, and many of the principles we discuss today can be applied to dance or consort music of the 16th century and earlier, and they can also be applied to German music and other national styles. So one of the things that people come to me and they say, oh, I went to this workshop and I had no idea what was going on because they started telling me to improvise and, what am I supposed to do? You know? So hopefully when we can all go back to our workshops, hopefully sooner rather than later, people will have an idea of what's going on should ornamentation be necessary. All right, just a reminder, what is ornamentation? It is the modification of music, usually, but not always, through the addition of notes to make it more beautiful or effective or to demonstrate the abilities of the interpreters. And there were 3 classes of ornamentation talked about by Quantz and others, including the essential graces, which we talked about last time. Diminutions, that's what we're talking about this time. This class involves taking a couple notes and breaking them apart into smaller note values and elaborating. A little bit like busting open the atom. You bust open one atom, you get a bunch of notes. And the third is elaborations of pauses such as cadenzas, that is improvisatory in nature, and we aren't going to go there. And like I said, we talked about the essential graces. All right. So, to talk about diminutions, we need to go back and look at some of the oldest rules for ornamenting. This comes to us from the 13th century. So if you're going to ornament, some of the oldest rules say ornaments should not be used on notes smaller than a semibreve, which would have been a whole note. But translated into modern time, that's like a quarter note in 4/4 time. So in general, try not to put too many ornaments on too small of notes. That's the first rule. Second rule, ornaments should be placed on the unaltered notes of the mode, okay? In modern times, the ornaments should be on the scale or the harmony notes and not necessarily other ornamental notes. So hopefully that will become more apparent as we go along. Long trills are always to be placed on the penultimate note before cadence, but we already knew that from our essential graces. And an appoggiatura is permitted at the beginning of all ornaments. So see, ornaments have always included the essential graces. Well, now we get specifically to us, Ganassi. In the 16th century, he has this to say about diminutions and ornamenting. Having introduced you to the rudiments in the arts of divisions, it now depends on your intelligence and dexterity to apply and put into practice what you have learned. Okay, so he gives you some ideas and some examples, and then he expects you to go and grind it out. He then says each division must begin and end on the same note as the unornamented ground, but there are exceptions, and we'll see that in a little bit. His examples are based on melodic intervals, so he's not as worried about the harmony underneath his examples. And the examples for each interval begin simply and become progressively more florid. And Ganassi is dealing with a lot of different time signatures and notation practices from today, but he suggests that any of his suggestions can be rhythmically altered to fit whatever you are doing. Now I'm going to stop sharing this for a second and pull up Ganassi's treatise here, because we need to see that. Oh, I know where that is. So weird. Okay, we're going to pull that up so we can see what Ganassi's talking about. And while I'm at it, I'm going to pull up one more thing. Ah, there it is. All right. So now I'm going to share again, and we'll look at what Ganassi's talking about. And all right, this is Ganassi's book, Intitulata Fontegara, where he talks about his recorder that he developed. Here's his fingering chart. And then he starts talking to you about how to tongue. And then he starts telling you what to do with simple notes. Okay? So in this example here, I wonder if I can make it bigger. That's too big. So we have this simple little melody of whole notes. And he has bussed up each whole note into 4 notes. And he said in his rules, you should start and end your diminution on the note that you are chopping up. And then here he gets even more extreme in his chopping up. So now, and he's changed the rhythms. And he continues to chop up. So that's his first example. And then he starts getting pretty specific. This is where it gets really cool. If you don't have this book, I highly recommend going to imslp and downloading this book, especially if you want to start ornamenting your dances, any of your solos. I'm trying to find a good size. Let's go 35%.
Could you make that a tiny bit bigger? Thank you.
Yep, I'm working on it. I'm trying to find a good one. All right, so let me show you what we've got here. How he's organized this book. Because these are things that you can go and look at and you can say, oh, I've got something similar to that in my music. and I'm going to try to cram these notes into my music, okay? He's gone through the hard work. So here you have an interval of a major second. And after that, he's showing you everything that he's come up with to ornament a major second. You can go anywhere in your music and start looking for major seconds, and it gets even more elaborate. That one's not so exciting. He's showing you all sorts of rhythmic variations and variations of notes and octaves to make a major second more interesting. Go back. Here he's got some more. And some more and some more. Lots of different things to do. Okay. So, this is what we're talking about. What does Quantz in the mid-18th century have to say about diminutions and ornamenting? The first thing he has to say is, eager to be counted amongst the multitude of virtuosi, you know, we all want to be virtuosi, they too often begin the wrong way around, namely with solo playing, and martyr themselves with many elaborate ornaments and difficult feats for which they are not quite ready, obscuring the execution of learning to make it distinct. So what Quantz is telling us to do is, as we begin to ornament, start simply. Don't try to cram too much in. And like Ganassi, Quantz is concerned with showing the student what to do with a given interval. Like Ganassi, Quantz assumes that the student knows his or her scales. But unlike Ganassi, Quantz is very concerned with the harmony and the baseline of what's going on and instructs the student to study harmony. So Quantz is looking at the diminutions not just melodically, but he's also looking to how those diminutions line up with the harmony underneath. And like Ganassi, Quantz shows rhythmic variations. However, if you observe closely, his rhythmic variations are not quite as wild, as asymmetric as Ganassi's figures. So we're going to go look at. Okay. So these examples are taken from Quantz's book here. They're all in his treatise. And to make my life easier, when my teachers would assign me these assignments where I would have to write all my ornaments, I copied them and I put them all in one place. So, a lot like Ganassi, Quantz is showing us what we can do with a certain interval. In this case, what can we do with 3 repeated notes? Just 3 boring repeated notes. It turns out you can do quite a lot with 3 boring repeated notes. You can add some grace notes. You can add a Nachschlag. You can do all sorts of stuff. You can change up the rhythm for some syncopations. That's always exciting. You can add your trills. You can do a lot with 3 repeated notes. So if you were to see that in your music.
What did you call those notes on A?
The grace notes.
Yeah, what did you call those?
Grace notes.
Oh, I thought I heard something else, sorry.
Oh, and B, the Nachschlag.
It was a word like slog.
That's B, the Nachschlag. Nachchtslag. The Nachschlag is an ascending grace note figure of 2 notes. And then Quantz continues to go on looking for situations that you might see in some of your music. Here's an ascending scale, and he's assuming these harmonies underneath this scale, and with those assumptions, he's come up with all these variations. So if you were to see that in your music, come on over to this table and try it out. All right. So, how do I practice diminutions ornamentation? First, I select what piece or movement I'm going to work on. I study the key and the scale and the harmony for whatever I'm going to work on. And I study the plain melody. Just make sure that I feel very secure about the plain melody before I do anything to it. I determine its character. Is it happy? Is it sad? Is it dramatic, tense? Because that will tell me how much I have to cram into this melody. You know, if something's very happy, you might pick a little bit more sprightly ornaments. If something's sad, it might be more sparse. You never know. I add my essential graces first, like I identify cadences, I put in my appoggiaturas, my mordents, my turns. And then I grab my trusty examples and I start experimenting. I literally just experiment to see what's going to work and what doesn't. And I might make several versions for a given movement. I do this a lot, and I write everything down. So I have heard people, oh, it's so sad. They'll come back from a workshop and they'll say, oh, they told me to ornament and they wouldn't let me write it down and they said I should never write it down. No, don't do that. Go ahead. You're allowed to write things down, and you can spend time thinking about your ornaments, and as you practice this skill, you will become faster at it, so that, you know, if you're told to sight read and add ornaments, eventually you'll be able to do some at sight. And then you practice the ornaments you decide on until they are memorized. Okay? So we're going to look at our first historic example of how the diminutions were used. And that's where this piece comes in. The Corelli sonatas here have been transposed for alto recorder. Now the lore is that Corelli, who was a violinist, had some apprentices, had some students, and Corelli was giving a concert, and he started playing these ornaments, and one of his apprentices wrote them down so that we now know, or we think we know, what Corelli was doing during the concert. And that gives us an idea of how these things have progressed. So, study examples if you can. So let's study this example. I am going to play, if you would like to play along with me on your alto recorder, or you can still play on tenor. I don't think you'll have to transpose. I'm going to play the main melody starting here, and we're going to go to the cadence, all right? So, if everybody is muted, all right. So we're going to just play this main melody, get a sense for it, and see how that goes. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to do that melody one more time, and then we're going to see what Corelli did with it. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Now let's see what he did. First off, he didn't really follow Jerome of Moravia's rule that you can only embellish long notes. He did embellish some eighth notes. He also used some essential graces. You can see right there, and there, and there. He used some appoggiaturas. Appoggiaturas are always welcome, so says Jerome of Moravia. Then he decided that he was going to split up this little eighth note into 4 notes. He doesn't start the diminution on a C, but he definitely ends it on the C, so you can see that's where they have it in common. All right, he adds a triple ascending grace here, and then he splits up this D into 2 notes, And this C, he splits up into 3 notes. So if you're brave enough to try along with me, I'm going to play the ornamented version so that you can hear it. Just get rid of some of this on the screen so it's not as cluttered. All right, so if you want to mute yourself and play along, we can give it a try. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Anybody want to try that again? Okay, we'll try it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So studying these examples can be very, 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 very useful. If we go to the next phrase here, we can start to see a little bit more of some of the more florid diminutions as described by Ganassi a couple centuries earlier. Actually, a century earlier, we start to see some figures that don't wind up being perfectly rhythmic in the conventional sense. But first, let's play the melody. Oops, I'm going to play a little bit of this melody. Just the plain melody. If you want to play along with the plain melody, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this melody is almost identical. It's just up a third or up a fifth from where we began. And so we have a look around to see what he did with his diminutions. So if we look at, he didn't bother to do a diminution there. So you don't always have to do the same thing. You can mix it up. This one is the same as this one. But he didn't add anything to the next portion of the phrase. And for what would have been this, he got really exciting there. Now this little diminution really conforms to the rules that Ganassi talks about. It starts on the first note he's going to, and you can tell he's not worried about this A. He's worried about the third because he ends on the G. So he's looking for diminutions that fill in the third. We'll look at a little chart in just a moment. Okay, we're just going to try this phrase with the ornaments. So if you want to play along with me, I'm going to be starting. Get rid of that. Starting there and ending at that F sharp. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody get that group of 7 in? That's kind of wild, isn't it? We're going to try one more time. Now, if we listen to what Quantz says about diminutions, if you have a hard time playing a group of 7, don't use them when you make your ornaments. Use what you can play. But let's just try one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now that everybody is completely overwhelmed, like, oh, this is so exciting, but how would I ever know how to do that? We're going to look at, very quickly,
It's also very Italian.
it is very Italian. We're going to look at my favorite secret weapon here for doing diminutions. And it is this book by Philippe Martel. And it is The Art of Diminutions for the 16th and 17th century. And what this man has done is a gift to everybody who wants to learn how to ornament. He has gone through every treatise from the 16th and 17th century, and he has compiled all of the variations that these people have written about an ascending second. So when I go through my music and I see an ascending second I want to ornament, I come here and I start looking and I start seeing what's going to work and what's not going to work. Of course, it's a copyrighted book, so I only made one page. I highly recommend, if you're interested in doing these ornaments, that you go and look. It's a fantastic book. It has everything. Every interval you could want. Descending fifths, sixths, fourths. He's got it all. All right, which brings us to today's experiment. So, ornamenting our own solo. This is the second movement of the Vivaldi concerto, RV 443, for little tiny sopranino recorder. I'm not going to play it today because I think it's going to freak out my microphone. But what we are going to do is we are going to ornament the beginning. We're going to look at our intervals. We're going to try something. We're going to add some notes. And the first thing that I recommend is you just get really comfortable with the melody. So let's go through from the beginning to that D sharp. We'll see if we can do it. This is in 12/8 time and it is slow. So grab your favorite recorder and you can try playing along with me. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. As far as we're going. Anybody want to do that melody again? Let's do that melody again. 1, 2, ready, play. Alright, so now I'm just going to go through the process of what I look for when I am thinking about ornamenting. So of course I look for trills, cadences, and we don't really have any big cadences here, although we could probably make a case for doing a short trill or so on the E or the D sharp, but I look for that. I look for places where I would want to put appoggiaturas. I see a few places. We've got some thirds to fill in here. And I also look for places that I'm not going to touch. I'm not going to put any ornaments because they're already busy enough. So I'm not going to do anything right there. So that leaves me to play around with those notes there. So I have an ascending. I can either focus on the ascending third from E to G and try to figure out what to do there, or I can focus on the ascending fifth from E to B and not worry too much about the G because it'll probably be taken care of anyway. Who would like to hear me do which interval? Anybody? Which would you like me to work on? The third or the fifth? Nobody cares? Okay, so I'm going to go to my trusty book here, and I'm going to look up.
So you would ornament you would ornament the first one, and because my first thought on seeing this is that I wouldn't ornament the first group so that it establishes the melody in the listener's ear, and because there's a repetition, I would ornament the second group. Is that in any way thinking?
So, if there were no repeat, I would do probably the same. But I'm not going to be playing any ornaments the first time through. I'm going to be doing this all on the repeat.
I see. Okay.
So I actually can do two different things when I get back here. So I'm looking up my trusty guide on how to ornament ascending fifths. And well, I came prepared, so I already worked out some. So the original melody was and here's what I've worked out by focusing on the fifth, the distance between the E and the B. Everybody hear what I did there? I used
Yes.
one very simply. I made one ornament simply and I just filled in the scale here. And then the second one I made a little bit more elaborate by doing a turn. Now, if I wanted to focus, instead of on the fifth, if I wanted to focus on the thirds, doing something on the thirds, I wind up with a very different sort of feel. So let's say I wanted to focus mostly on that third. That gives it a different feel, and that I all worked out from my book. I didn't have to write any of those notes. I just had to work them out in the context of this piece. All right, so now we've got this big giant goose egg of a note sitting there. We can do something to that. We can make it florid, or I was preferring to do an appoggiatura. Because as you saw in the Corelli example, appoggiaturas were also used alongside of diminutions. So there's no reason why you can't just use an appoggiatura. So. Then I continued just as would normally be. Now I can do whatever I want with that dotted quarter note E. It's 3 beats long, but after doing a little bit of floridness over there, I decided that was enough. Now we come over to measure 2 here. And you can see that we've got a gap, a nice gap of a third. These are 16th notes. We're probably not going to get a lot of diminutions in there. One of the easiest things to do is to fill in a third. So instead of just going from the C to the E, I can add the D. And I can even change that rhythm. So I just did 2 30-seconds and a 16th, or I can do triplets. sounds different if I change the rhythm. Would y'all agree? Okay.
Yes.
I can also do things with the ascending scale here. We do have those examples of descending intervals. I can probably get a little turn in there. So you can get a little bit in, but you don't want to necessarily go so bonkers that you can't play it or that it no longer fits with the character of the piece. And you also want to be discriminating about where you put these ornaments, these diminutions. For example, I'm not touching that. Not with a 12-foot pole. I'm playing exactly what's there both times. I'm not putting anything over that. They have it marked as 64th notes. Have you ever seen that? Never. Bill's like, never. I've never seen that. All right. Do we have any questions so far? No?
What you're talking about is very tasteful.
I'm sorry? Can you say that again?
What? And no question so much as observing that what you're doing is very tasteful.
Yes. No matter what, thank you for saying it's tasteful. No matter what we do with our ornamentation, Quantz always says, just do it in good taste. Of course, that depends on the individual, but just have good taste. Don't do any more than you can handle. And this is one of those topics where you just really have to sit down with a piece. I should have asked you all for pieces that you wanted to work on ornaments for, but you sit down and you wrestle with it. There's no shortcuts. There are no shortcuts to doing the ornamentation. So, if you are wanting to do ornamentation, this went faster than I expected. Yay. I highly recommend getting a hold of the Ganassi Fontegara. It's on imslp. Purchasing this book, which is a compendium of basically, let's see, Ganassi, Virgiliano, Casa, Bassano, Oritz, Roganoni, everything that they put down on paper is in this book, so that you can play around with them. And if you're interested in doing ornamentation a little bit later, like I said, 18th century, you might want to grab a hold of the Quantz, even though it's for transverse flute rather than recorder. He goes through just about everything and gives you tables and examples. And then you just wrestle. That's all you do. So, I have a question though for Jarrett. Jarrett, did this answer your question about ornamentation when you handed me all those papers?
Well, I didn't really have any question, but this was very lovely.
This is very lovely. Oh, thank you. So the papers that Jarrett had given me was like, this is an ornament, this is a cambiata and an escape tone and a punch in the mouth. And I'm like, nobody ever thought of ornamentation that way. At least not that I can tell from the historic record. They were usually looking at it melodically and harmonically and just seeing what would fit. Yes, sir. Bill.
Do you ever have an occasion to ornament in contemporary music?
Oh, I'm sure you do. I'm sure that
How about you yourself?
I don't play a lot of recorder contemporary music, but I have seen places. I did play, what was it? The George Crumb Ancient Voices of Wales. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of far out. And in it is, he'd give you like 12 seconds to play whatever you wanted. So it's not quite the same as the ornamentation that we're studying today. This would be more improvisatory. It would always turn out different with every performance that you did, that sort of thing. Organized ornamentation in 20th century or contemporary music. I haven't seen it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Anything else?
No, I'm gonna have to agree though that your ornamentation for the piece we were just playing, that was really beautiful.
Thank you.
It was so tasteful, even with the Appoggiatura just like cutting off that end. Da 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 da. It was just that was the right everything.
Well, Jerome of Moravia called the Appoggiatura, or we think he was calling the Appoggiatura the stormy note.
Mm.
It's a little bit of drama in there. I did try, if you guys all want to laugh, I did try looking at the Quantz table and seeing how many of Quantz's examples would fit into Vivaldi, and I had to abandon it halfway because it sounded so bad and weird. But if you want me to play that for you, I'd be happy to.
Yes.
Okay, so I got maybe a quarter of the way through. Let's see what we've got. Oops, cancel. Let's go back to, okay. So I tried applying some of Quantz's ideas to the Vivaldi. It's really quite funny. It just sounded really weird.
Totally lacked elegance.
Yeah, it stopped sounding like Vivaldi and it started sounding more like Quantz. So that's why you just have to wrestle with it. And I think looking at the Ganassi, even though Vivaldi is 18th century, he's Italian, looking at the historic Italian sources, I think will get you a better result. So we can stop recording to YouTube and then we can kibitz if